The wind screamed across the Oregon coastline, carrying the scent of salt and storm. Waves hurled themselves against the rocks below. The Driftwood Inn, a small weathered guest house, clinging to the cliffs like a stubborn memory. Inside, Clara Hayes moved quickly between the windows, trying to fasten each latch before the next gust could tear it open. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the horizon in gray. Her hair was damp, sticking to her cheeks as she pushed a wooden beam against the front door. She had learned to handle storms alone. After all, silence and wind were the only things that never judged her. The world she had left behind in Seattle had been full of glass towers and smiling liars, and the rain here felt more honest. When thunder rolled overhead, Clara reached for the lantern on the counter, lighting it with steady hands. The power lines often failed during these tempests, and she had learned not to panic when the lights blinked out. But tonight there was something different in the air, something heavier than rain. She felt it in the way the wind howled through the cracks of the inn, like it was searching for a way in. A sharp knocking startled her. 3 quick raps, then silence. She froze. No one traveled this road at night, not in weather like this. The nearest town was 6 miles away, and the coast road had likely flooded hours ago. The knocking came again, weaker this time, a desperate flutter against the wooden door. Clara lifted the lantern and approached. Rain drummed against the roof as she pulled the door open. A blast of wind burst through, nearly knocking the flame out. Standing on the threshold was an elderly woman, drenched to the bone. Her gray hair clung to her temples, and her thin coat shimmered with water. Her lips were pale. "Please," the woman gasped. "I got lost. My driver left to find help, but he never came back. I can't find the road." Clara stepped forward without hesitation. "Come in." "Hurry!" She helped the woman inside, locking the door behind her. The warmth of the small fireplace flickered across the old woman's face as Clara fetched a blanket from the chair. "Sit by the fire. I'll make you some tea." The woman's hands trembled as she tried to remove her gloves. Clara knelt beside her, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you, dear," the woman whispered. "I thought I'd freeze out there." "You're safe now," Clara said gently. "You're at the Driftwood Inn." The woman smiled faintly. "You live here alone?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Alone's quieter." The kettle began to whistle softly from the stove. Clara poured 2 cups, placing one before her guest. Steam curled upward, blurring the woman's face for a moment. She looked fragile, almost transparent in the golden light. "My name is Evelyn," she said after a moment. "Evelyn Ward." Clara extended her hand. Clara Hayes, a quiet settled between them, the kind that did not feel empty, but full like the sea before dawn. Evelyn's gaze wandered around the small room, the stacks of books, the sketches of buildings pinned near the window, the vase of wilted wildflowers. "You're an artist," Clara shook her head lightly. "Architect once, Seattle, long ago." "Why did you leave?" Clara smiled faintly. "Let's just say the city and I didn't agree on what honesty looked like." Evelyn studied her with an intensity that felt maternal. "You did the right thing, whatever it was. I can see that." Clara looked into the fire. "Doing the right thing cost me everything I thought mattered." The old woman's voice softened. "Sometimes the storms we run from bring us to the people we need most." Clara looked up, caught off guard by the warmth in those words. She did not answer. Outside, the storm howled like an animal, but here by the fire, the world felt suspended. They spoke quietly through the night about books, about the ocean, about loneliness. Evelyn told stories of a son she had not seen in years, a man too proud and too wounded to look back. Clara listened, feeling the ache in those words as if it were her own. When Evelyn finally fell asleep in the chair, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, Clara adjusted it gently. The woman's breathing steadied, and Clara lingered for a moment, studying the deep lines of her face. Whoever she was, she carried a sorrow that no storm could wash away. Clara turned toward the window. The wind was easing now, though the rain still fell in silver sheets. Far beyond the dunes, headlights flickered briefly on the coastal road, vanishing just as quickly. A black SUV slowed near the bend, its driver catching sight of the single light burning from the inn. Inside, Clara blew out the lantern and whispered to herself, unaware of the destiny that had already begun to shift outside her door. Morning came slowly, bleeding through the heavy clouds that still hung over the Oregon coast. The sea had calmed, though its restless breathing echoed faintly through the cliffs below the Driftwood Inn. Clara woke to the soft crackle of dying embers and the faint scent of smoke and salt. She sat up on the couch blanket around her shoulders, realizing she must have fallen asleep by the fire. Across the room, Evelyn stirred in the armchair, her silver hair illuminated by the pale morning light seeping through the curtains. For a moment, Clara watched her sleep, the serenity on her face, the gentleness that seemed to defy the violent night that had passed. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she smiled faintly, her voice still hoarse. "I must have dozed off. Did the storm ease?" "Mostly," Clara replied, standing and stoking the fire. "The worst has passed." She walked into the small kitchen and began to prepare breakfast: fresh coffee, toast, scrambled eggs. The routine steadied her. She had learned that order was its own comfort. Evelyn watched her quietly. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. "You've already done more than anyone would have." "You were half frozen when you came in," Clara said, turning with a small smile. "I couldn't just let you wander back into the storm." Evelyn chuckled weakly. "I used to say that to my son when he was young. He was always running headfirst into things. Storms, fights, impossible dreams." Clara brought her the coffee. And now Evelyn's expression dimmed. "Now I hardly know him. We haven't spoken in years. Too many harsh words, too much pride. I came to find him to make things right, if that's still possible." Clara nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that confession settle in the quiet room. "Family's hard," she said, "sometimes harder than any storm." Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she smiled with a weary grace. "You sound older than your years. Life tends to age you faster when you stop pretending." Clara replied, pouring herself a cup. Before Evelyn could respond, the distant rumble of an engine broke the stillness. It grew louder, tires crunching over wet gravel. Clara moved toward the window, peering out through the fogged glass. A sleek black SUV was pulling into the small parking area beside the inn. It gleamed against the gray morning, far too polished for the rugged coast. Her stomach tightened as she watched a tall man step out, his dark overcoat whipping in the wind. He paused, looking toward the inn's sign, as if confirming what he already knew. Then he started toward the door with long, purposeful strides. Evelyn set down her coffee, her fingers trembling. "It can't be." The knock came firm and deliberate. Clara opened the door to find herself staring at a man who looked as though he belonged to a different world, entirely clean-shaven, tailored his expression, carved in steel. His eyes, sharp and pale, swept over the room before landing on her. "I'm looking for Evelyn Ward," he said, his tone low and commanding. Clara instinctively straightened her hand, still on the door. "She's resting," she replied evenly. "She almost froze to death last night. You can wait." His brows lifted slightly, unused to being told no. "I'm her son," he said after a pause. "Graham Ward." "That may be," Clara said calmly, "but she's still sleeping." Something flickered in his gaze, surprise maybe, or irritation, but it passed as quickly as it came. He stepped inside without asking his shoes, leaving wet prints on the old floorboards. Evelyn had risen now, pale but smiling through her shock. "Graham," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "You came." He froze for a moment, then exhaled. "Mother," he said softly, though the words sounded like it hadn't crossed his lips in years. She reached for his hand, but he hesitated, then let her fingers rest over his. Clara turned away to give them space, pretending to tidy the counter, though her attention never fully left them. Evelyn's voice trembled as she spoke. "I thought I'd surprise you. It's been so long." 5 years, Graham said quietly. "You should have called. It's dangerous to travel alone in this weather." "I wanted to see you," she said, "to make things right." He nodded once the gesture tight and practiced, then looked around the small inn. "You spent the night here, I did," Evelyn replied, turning to Clara with gratitude. "Thanks to her, she saved me." Graham's gaze followed his mother's to where Clara stood, her hands still wrapped around a dish towel. For a moment, neither spoke. His eyes, gray-blue, intelligent, assessing, studied her with the same precision he might use to evaluate a business deal. But there was something else there, too, a quiet curiosity that made Clara's breath catch. "You should thank her properly," Evelyn said. Graham inclined his head slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth but distant. Most people would have called for help and left her at the door. Clara met his gaze steadily. Most people forget what being human feels like. The words hung between them, cutting through the polite surface of the moment. Something unreadable passed across his face before he turned back to his mother. "We should get you home once the road's clear." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I think I'll rest a little longer first." As she settled back into the chair, Clara watched Graham's guarded expression soften just enough to reveal a flicker of concern. Whatever wall stood between them had cracks. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft now, cleansing. Inside, 3 lives sat within the same quiet room, unaware that the storm had only just begun. The storm had not fully passed. By late afternoon, the waves rose again, slapping against the rocks below the Driftwood Inn. The road leading to town was still closed by fallen branches, and the radio warned of another front moving in by nightfall. Clara stacked firewood near the hearth, her movements precise, calm, controlled. She had always found comfort in order, in the rhythm of doing. Across the room, Graham Ward stood by the window, his tall frame outlined against the gray light. His coat was gone now, revealing a charcoal sweater and posture that spoke of years spent commanding boardrooms rather than weathering storms. He looked completely out of place among the worn wooden furniture and flickering shadows, yet strangely anchored there like a piece of another world accidentally washed ashore. "The roads are impassable," Clara said, breaking the silence. "You might be here for the night." Graham turned from the window. "I've stayed in worse places," he replied, though the tone suggested he rarely had. "This isn't a hotel," she said. It's a guest house for travelers who still believe in second chances. He gave a faint smile the first she'd seen. Do you get many of those? Not often, she admitted. People who need second chances usually don't look for them in coastal storms. He studied her for a long moment, then walked toward the counter. May I? He asked, gesturing to the coffee pot. She nodded. He poured himself a cup, then one for her, and for a while they drank in silence, while the fire hissed and the wind moaned softly outside. Why did you help her? He asked finally. His voice quiet but deliberate. Most people would have called 911, locked the door, and waited for morning. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze, because she needed warmth, not a report. The simplicity of the answer seemed to disarm him. He looked down at his cup, steam curling between them. You talk like someone who's seen too much of the world. Maybe just enough, she said. Enough to know it can break you if you let it. His eyes lifted again, steady and searching. And yet you live here in a place that looks like the end of the earth. It's quieter at the end, she replied softly, and quiet helps you remember who you are after the noise is gone. Graham leaned against the counter, his gaze narrowing slightly, as though piecing together a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. You weren't born for quiet, he said after a moment. You carry yourself like someone who used to give orders, not take them. Clara smiled faintly. Once upon a time, maybe. I was an architect in Seattle, was he repeated? What happened, a disagreement? She said, stirring her coffee. With a client who didn't believe honesty belonged in blueprints. You stood up to them. It wasn't courage, she replied, eyes distant. Just the inability to stay silent when something's wrong. Graham's gaze softened, his voice low. My mother used to say that exact thing. Silence is the accomplice of injustice. She's a wise woman, Clara said. She raised a man who came through a storm for her. His expression shifted somewhere between pride and guilt. I should have been there before the storm. We all should have been somewhere before. Something, she said gently. For a while neither spoke. The sound of rain became their only dialogue, steady and hypnotic. Then Evelyn appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of Clara's old quilts. You two look serious, she said with a knowing smile. Am I interrupting something? Not at all, Clara said, helping her to the armchair by the fire. How are you feeling? Better than I deserve. Evelyn replied. And hungry. Do I smell coffee? Graham brought her a cup, his gestures careful, almost hesitant. You should rest, he said. I'm fine, she assured him. Don't fuss. She looked between the two of them, her eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. It's been a long time since someone argued in this room. It feels alive again. Graham sat opposite her shoulders, relaxing for the first time that day. Mother, why didn't you tell me you were coming? Because you wouldn't have let me, she answered simply. You would have sent a driver or made excuses. I wanted to see you, not your assistant's calendar. He sighed. You always assume the worst, and you always prove me right, she teased. Clara turned away, smiling at the exchange. She began preparing a simple dinner soup and biscuits, the kind that warmed you from the inside out. Behind her, the quiet murmur of mother and son filled the inn, mending something that had long been frayed. When she finally sat with them, Evelyn took her hand. You've given me more kindness in one night than I've had in years, she said softly. You remind me of someone I once was before life hardened me. Clara felt her throat tighten. And you remind me of someone I lost. Evelyn squeezed her hand. Then maybe we both found something tonight. Graham listened silently, watching the two women. There was a gentleness in Clara's face that stirred something he hadn't felt in years, a kind of unguarded truth he couldn't quantify or explain. She wasn't beautiful in the polished way of the women he met at galas and boardrooms. She was something rarer, honest, unadorned, and impossibly steady. When the fire dimmed, Evelyn excused herself to rest again. Clara began clearing the dishes, and Graham rose to help. "You don't have to," she said. "I'm used to taking care of things." "So am I," he replied. "But sometimes it's good to let someone else." Their fingers brushed as they reached for the same plate. Neither moved for a heartbeat. The air between them changed, suddenly charged. She looked up, meeting his eyes. They were the color of a storm about to break cold at first glance, but full of something deeper if you dared to look long enough. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect? Someone ordinary. People who live alone by the sea usually are." Clara's lips curved slightly. "And you're not what I expected either. No, you listen more than you talk." "That's rare for your kind." "My kind?" he asked, amused. "Men who think they can buy the horizon," she said, walking past him with the dishes. He watched her disappear into the kitchen, a smile ghosting across his face. When she returned, the power flickered, the lights dimmed, and for an instant the world outside felt impossibly far away. They sat by the fading fire, neither speaking, both pretending they weren't wondering what tomorrow would bring. Beyond the window, the wind shifted again, carrying the echo of waves crashing against the cliffs. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a beginning. Night fell heavy and cold over the Driftwood Inn. The storm had lessened, but the wind still howled through the eaves like a restless spirit, searching for a door left open. Clara set another log into the fireplace, watching it catch with a soft crackle. The orange light painted the walls in flickering warmth, turning the small room into a fragile refuge from the dark outside. Evelyn had already retired to her room upstairs, her frail body finally giving in to rest. Graham lingered by the window, again, staring into the fog, as though it held the answers to questions he hadn't yet asked. Clara could feel the tension still sitting between them, unspoken words and half-truths that floated like smoke in the air. He looked like a man carrying too much history on his back, and she wondered what kind of life hardened a person that way. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. "Sleep feels like a luxury," he replied without turning. "And I stopped affording it a long time ago." She tilted her head, studying him. "Even billionaires have to rest sometimes." He looked over his shoulder, one corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest hint of a smile. "You Googled me." "No," she said simply. "You wear your reputation like a name tag." His chuckle was low, almost reluctant. "I suppose that's fair." For a few minutes they said nothing more. Then came the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Clara's head snapped toward the door, heart tightening. "No one should be driving up here tonight," she said. Graham straightened his expression, sharpening instantly. "Expecting someone, no." She moved to the window. Headlights glared through the mist, cutting across the courtyard. A dark sedan stopped just short of the porch, and a figure stepped out. A man in a long black coat, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements deliberate. He slammed the door, glancing up toward the inn's light, before striding toward it. Martin Cole Graham muttered under his breath. Clara turned to him. "You know him, he's an old associate." "He shouldn't be here." His tone was clipped cold. Before she could reply, a heavy knock rattled the door. Graham opened it, his face set in controlled surprise. "Martin, what are you doing here?" "The storm's bad," Martin said smoothly, brushing water off his shoulders as he stepped inside without invitation. "I was checking on you. Roads are closing all over the coast." His eyes moved past Graham and landed on Clara. Something about the way he looked at her too long to. Assessing made her stomach twist. "And you must be the innkeeper," he said, his smile practiced but hollow. "Clara Hayes," she answered curtly. "You're lucky to have electricity still." Martin continued, his tone almost mocking. "Charming place. A little lonely, though. Don't you think some of us prefer the quiet?" she said evenly. "Quiet," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "Interesting." Graham's jaw tightened. "You've checked on me. You can go now." Martin chuckled, ignoring him. "Always so direct, Graham. No wonder you're alone up here. Where's Evelyn?" The mention of her name froze the air. "She's resting," Graham said, voice flat. "She was caught in the storm." "Ah," Martin murmured, feigning sympathy. "Still meddling in things she shouldn't, I see." His words hung like poison in the air. Evelyn had been right. There was venom behind his charm. Clara watched Graham's posture stiffen, saw the restrained fury in his eyes. "You're out of line," Graham said quietly. Martin smirked. "Just concerned, that's all. You've got a reputation to protect. Don't want any distractions." His gaze flicked to Clara, deliberate and invasive. The look made her skin crawl. She turned away, pouring herself more coffee to hide the tremor in her hands. "This isn't the time or place," Graham said. "Go back to Portland. We'll talk business later." "Business," Martin echoed, walking closer, until he was nearly shoulder to shoulder with him. "You think what we do is just business. You think you can separate it from your precious morality." His voice dropped. "You're standing in a house built by people like me." Graham's eyes darkened. "And one day I'll tear that house down if I have to." Martin laughed softly. "Spoken like your father. You're more alike than you'd like to admit." Clara set the mug down sharply. "That's enough." The two men turned toward her, surprised. Her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't your boardroom, and it's not a battleground. If you want to argue, take it outside. Otherwise, leave." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Martin's lips curved into a thin smile. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." He reached for his coat. "Enjoy your storm, Graham. Just remember, every shelter has its price." He stepped outside the wind, swallowing his words as the door slammed shut behind him. The silence left in his wake was heavy and electric. Clara exhaled slowly, turning back to Graham. "He seems pleasant," she said dryly. Graham rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaustion creeping into his features. "He's a snake. My father trusted him once. He lost everything because of it. And yet somehow I let him back into my life." "Then that's on you," she said gently. He looked up, eyes flashing. "You think I don't know that knowing and admitting are different things?" For a moment, anger flickered in his expression, but beneath it, something cracked. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. "You sound like her," he said quietly. "My mother. She was never afraid to hold up a mirror. She seems like someone worth listening to." "She was," he murmured. "I just stopped hearing her." The clock ticked softly in the corner. Rain tapped at the windows again, gentler now. Clara gathered her thoughts, then asked, "What did he mean about a price? Martin doesn't believe in kindness without debt," Graham said. "He thinks everyone has a number, and I've spent half my life proving him wrong." Clara studied him carefully. "And yet you still keep him close. Sometimes keeping your enemies close is the only way to watch them. Or to become them, she said quietly. He looked at her sharply, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're not wrong. She gave a faint smile. I rarely am. His laugh was short but real this time. You're different, he said. Most people don't talk to me like that. Maybe most people want something from you, she replied. I don't. No, he said softly. You really don't. Their eyes met, then steady, unguarded. It wasn't flirtation, not yet. It was something deeper, more dangerous recognition. A mirror held between two people who had both built walls out of regret. Upstairs, Evelyn stirred in her sleep, murmuring words no one heard. Outside, the sea rose again, waves colliding against the cliffs with the slow rhythm of fate. The fire burned lower shadows lengthening across the room. And somewhere far down the coastal road, Martin Cole drove into the night, smiling to himself, already planning the next move that would bring them all back into the storm. Morning came gray and brittle, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and thoughts alike. The storm had finally broken, leaving the coastline blanketed in mist. The Driftwood Inn sat quiet, except for the distant hum of the sea. Clara moved through the kitchen, her movements slower today. The encounter with Martin had left her uneasy. Something about the way he looked at her, the deliberate cruelty in his words, had stirred an old fear she'd buried years ago. She poured coffee and carried a cup to the common room, where Evelyn sat by the window, wrapped in a thick shawl. The old woman's eyes followed the waves, as though searching for something or someone lost long ago. Sleep all right? Clara asked softly. Evelyn turned her smile, tired but kind. Better than I expected. Thank you for last night. You don't need to thank me. Oh, but I do, Evelyn said. You reminded me there's still goodness left in the world. She sipped her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. He came here, didn't he, Martin? Clara hesitated, then nodded. He said he was checking on Graham. Evelyn gave a dry laugh. Martin Cole doesn't check on people. He checks on opportunities. Her voice grew quieter. He's been a shadow in my life for 30 years. My husband trusted him once. It cost him everything. Clara sat across from her, brow furrowing. I don't understand. My husband, Harold Ward, was a civil engineer. Evelyn said, her gaze lost in memory. He worked for one of the earliest development branches of Ward Global, back when it was just a small construction firm. He believed in building things that lasted, things that helped people. Martin Cole believed in building power. He convinced Harold to sign a set of documents he didn't fully understand, contracts that allowed Martin to reroute funding, hide bribes, and falsify safety reports. When it all collapsed, Martin made sure Harold took the blame. The scandal ruined him. He died a year later. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind tapping against the window. Clara felt the words sink deep like stones thrown into dark water. And Graham, she asked quietly. He was young, Evelyn said. Too young to understand, but old enough to believe the headlines. He thought his father was a criminal. By the time I learned the truth, it was too late. Martin had already wrapped his hands around the company. I tried to tell Graham, but he wouldn't listen. He thought I was clinging to the past. Evelyn looked up at her, eyes full of grief and defiance. That man destroyed 2 generations of my family, and now he's here again. Clara's stomach turned. It was like watching her own past reflected in a cracked mirror. She rose and walked to the window, staring out at the gray horizon. Evelyn, she said slowly, the name Martin Cole. It's not unfamiliar to me. The old woman's brows knit. "You know him, I did," Clara said, her voice tight. "He was the investor behind the firm I worked for in Seattle. The one I left after filing a report about falsified permits. The project was his idea luxury towers built on wetlands under fake environmental clearance. When I refused to alter the survey data, the report vanished, my signature was forged, and the company turned against me. I lost my job, my license, everything." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't prove it was him, but now I'm sure." Evelyn reached out, gripping her hand. "My dear, you may have just found what I could not witness." Clara shook her head slowly. "No one listened to me then. Why would they now? People like him don't fall, they rise. Then maybe it's time someone pulled the tide out from under him," Evelyn said fiercely. Before Clara could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Graham appeared, his expression-drawn eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. He looked at them both, sensing the gravity in the air. "What's going on?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then met his gaze. "We were talking about Martin." His jaw tightened. "Don't. You should hear this," Evelyn said firmly. "You've avoided the truth long enough." "Mother," he said sharply, "not now." "Yes, now," she said. "Martin killed your father's legacy, and he's doing the same to yours." Graham's voice rose. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," Graham. Clara said, stepping closer. "Do you even know who you're working with?" His eyes snapped to hers. "This again." "Yes, this again," she said, her tone steady. "You think your company's clean, that your projects are transparent? He's been manipulating your financials, redirecting contracts, falsifying permits, the same crimes your father was blamed for." "You have no proof," he said coldly. "Not yet. But I've seen his methods, the signatures, the patterns. I could find it again." "You," he scoffed. "You're an innkeeper hiding from her own failures." His words hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. "I'm hiding from nothing," she said quietly. "I lost everything because I refused to lie. Can you say the same?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Evelyn turned away, eyes glistening. Graham's expression wavered for just a heartbeat, then hardened again. "You don't know him," he said. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Clara whispered. "And I know that men like him use loyalty to build prisons." She moved past him, grabbing her coat. "I won't stay where I'm doubted." "Clara, wait," Evelyn pleaded. "He's blind but not lost." "Don't give up on him." "I'm not giving up," Clara said softly. "I'm choosing peace." She opened the door, cold air rushing in the smell of salt and rain, clinging to her hair. Graham stood motionless, unable to stop her. "You think I'd risk everything to make up a story?" she said, her voice trembling now. "Maybe truth can still matter to someone, maybe not to you." Then she was gone. The sound of the door closing echoed through the hall like a final verdict. Evelyn sank into her chair, tears falling silently. Graham stood there for a long time, his chest, tight hands clenched. The anger that had shielded him for years began to crack, letting in something he couldn't name, shame maybe, or fear. When he turned toward the table, his eyes fell on a folded sheet of paper lying beside the cold coffee pot. He picked it up. The handwriting was neat, precise, unmistakably hers. "You told me power can't fix everything. Maybe truth can." He stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, the tide pulled back, exposing sharp rocks and fragments of shells beneath the waves. The truth had always been there, buried just deep enough to drown anyone brave enough to search for it. Rain fell again that evening, soft but relentless. A gray veil over the cliffs and the restless sea. The Driftwood Inn felt emptier than it had in years. Clara's absence lingered like the echo of a song that refused to fade. Graham stood at the window, hands buried in his pockets, staring into the storm he could no longer blame on the weather. His mother was resting upstairs, but sleep had eluded him completely. The words Clara had thrown at him kept replaying each one, cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. You think I'd risk everything to make up a story. Maybe truth can still matter to someone. Maybe not to you. He tried to dismiss them to convince himself that she was wrong, but a part of him, quiet, stubborn, painfully human, knew she wasn't. Evelyn's soft footsteps came down the stairs, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked at her son for a long moment before speaking. She was right, you know. Graham turned sharply. Mother, not now. If not now, when she asked. When you've driven everyone who ever cared about you away. He exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand. Martin's been with me since the start. He helped me rebuild the company. After your father died, because of him. Evelyn interrupted her voice, trembling with both grief and fury. Graham, he's been poisoning everything you've touched since you were 25. Don't you see that he looked away, jaw tightening? You have no proof. And what would you call the file she left you? Evelyn asked. You haven't even looked at it, have you? He didn't answer. You're afraid, she said softly. Not of losing the company, but of losing the illusion that you're different from your father. You built towers out of guilt, not vision. That's why they're crumbling. That's enough, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I'm trying to protect what's ours. You're protecting a ghost, she whispered. And in doing so, you've lost the only person who could have saved you from yourself. Graham turned away, his chest tightening as he heard her climb the stairs again, her frail voice fading into the creak of the old wood. When the room was silent once more, he sat down staring at the folded paper Clara had left behind. The words blurred again, just as they had earlier. He wanted to be angry at her, but all he could feel was shame. She had risked everything for truth once. He had risked nothing. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Outside, the rain turned heavier, beating against the glass with the steady rhythm of regret. Clara, meanwhile, was driving down the coastal road, her small car trembling under the wind. The wipers squeaked rhythmically, barely clearing the windshield. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she blinked through tears she refused to let fall. The road ahead blurred into silver mist. She told herself she had done the right thing. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix. But the ache in her chest disagreed. It felt like leaving something unfinished, like tearing out a page before the story was done. She stopped briefly at a gas station, the only one open for miles. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead as she filled the tank. The clerk, a man in his 60s, looked at her kindly. Rough night, he asked. Clara nodded. Rough few years? He smiled gently. Storms don't last. Neither does pain. She returned the smile faintly, thanked him, and drove off. By the time she reached the next town, the rain had softened. The small coastal motel where she checked in smelled faintly of salt and old linens. She unpacked just enough to survive the night, then sat by the window, staring at the ocean beyond. It was strange, she thought, how the same sea could look different depending on what your heart carried. At the Driftwood Inn, it had been home. Here it was, just water and distance. Back at the inn, Graham sat motionless until dawn began to bleed pale light over the horizon. He had not moved in hours. The fireplace had gone cold, and the coffee beside him had long since lost its warmth. He rose, finally walking to the window. The mist outside looked endless. He wanted to believe Clara was wrong, but Evelyn's story had cracked something deep within him. He remembered being 10 years old, standing beside his father, as reporters shouted questions about fraud, about forged documents, about lies he didn't understand. He remembered his father's silence, the way shame ate through him until it became part of him. And now, all these years later, Graham saw the reflection clearly. He was repeating the same silence. He turned toward the table where his phone buzzed. A message from Martin. "All good on your end. Need to finalize signatures today. Call me." Graham stared at it, the words blurring in his vision. His hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. He walked to his mother's room and opened the door quietly. Evelyn was awake, her eyes open but tired. "You haven't eaten," she said. "Neither have you," he replied softly. "You were right," he added after a pause. "About her, about him, about everything." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Then go find her, Graham. Don't wait until the storm takes her too. She won't want to see me. Then you'll have to earn the right to be seen," Evelyn said. "The truth has a way of finding its way home." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "Rest," he said gently. "I'll take care of it." As he turned to leave, Evelyn whispered, "Don't let fear make you small. Your father did, and it killed him." Downstairs, he stood in the doorway, staring at the coastline. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, now thin and gold. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled like rain and endings. He picked up the note once more, reading the words out loud this time. "Maybe truth can." He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket, then grabbed his coat. The door creaked as he stepped outside, the wind cool against his face. Behind him, the inn was quiet, only the faint hum of the sea and the echo of what had been. Ahead lay miles of road, and somewhere beyond it, a woman who had seen through his armor and walked away before it broke her. He didn't know if she would forgive him, but he knew one thing with certainty: he couldn't stay still while the truth waited beneath the waves. As he started the SUV and drove into the lightening sky, the last trace of the storm faded from the horizon. Inside the glove compartment, the file Clara had once sent him, the one he never opened, slipped from its envelope as the car jolted over a bump. A flash drive fell out, labeled in her handwriting, "Proof of everything." He stared at it, realization washing through him like cold water. For the first time in years, Graham Ward felt something close to faith. The truth was still out there. And maybe, just maybe, so was she. The rain returned that night, not violent this time, but steady. A patient rhythm that tapped against the hospital windows like a heartbeat. Graham sat in the corridor outside his mother's room, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The events of the day blurred together, the phone call from the innkeeper, the ambulance sirens, the sight of Evelyn, lying pale and still as paramedics carried her away. He had been too late to stop it, too late for so many things. She was stable now, the doctor said, exhaustion and stress, nothing more. But the sight of her hooked up to wires and tubes had shaken something loose in him, something he had been holding on to for years. He stared down at the flash drive in his hand, the one that had fallen from the envelope in his car. Clara's handwriting still marked it, proof of everything. He turned it over, thumb tracing the edge as if it could burn the guilt off his skin. He'd spent his entire career priding himself on control, on knowing every number, every risk. Yet the truth had been sitting inches away from him all along, ignored because it didn't fit the story he wanted to believe. A door opened behind him, and the low, familiar voice that followed sent a cold tremor through his chest. "You look like hell," Martin said casually. Stepping into the hallway, his suit immaculate despite the late hour. "Heard about Evelyn. Shame, really. But at her age." Graham rose slowly, every muscle tense. "What are you doing here?" "Checking in," Martin said. "We have contracts to finalize, and I figured I'd bring them personally. You've been quiet, makes investors nervous." "Investors," Graham repeated, his tone flat. "Is that what you call yourself now?" Martin smiled. "Always have." Graham stared at him for a long moment, then tossed the flash drive onto the nearby chair. "You know what this is?" Martin glanced at it, unbothered. "Another of your sentimental distractions." "It's proof," Graham said. "Proof of everything you've been doing behind my back. The falsified permits, the shell accounts, the missing money, all of it." Martin laughed quietly. "You've been listening to that woman, the one from the inn. What was her name? Clara." He said her name like an inconvenience. "You let her fill your head with stories. You always had a weakness for martyrs." "You forged my father's signature," Graham said, his voice low but shaking with anger. "You framed him. You used his death to build your empire, and I helped you do it again. Do you understand what that makes me?" Martin's eyes glinted with amusement. "Successful, corrupt," Graham spat. "Just like him." Your father Martin's smirk deepened. "Oh, come now. You're nothing like him." "He broke when the pressure came. You thrived. You did what he couldn't." Graham stepped closer, his fists clenched. "He died trying to do the right thing." "He died weak," Martin said. The punch came faster than Graham expected from himself. Martin stumbled back, blood smearing his lip shock, flickering briefly in his eyes before morphing into something colder. "Careful," he said softly. "You don't want to start a war you can't win." "It already started," Graham said. "You just didn't notice when I switched sides." He turned away, heart pounding, and walked down the hall toward his mother's room. Martin called after him, voice low and venomous. "Don't forget, Graham, you built your name on my foundation. If I fall, you go with me." Graham stopped, but didn't turn. "Then I'll rebuild it without you." He walked into his mother's room and closed the door. Evelyn was awake now, her eyes dim but alert. "Graham," she whispered. "He was here." "I know," he said, kneeling beside her bed. "And you were right, about everything." She reached for his hand, her grip frail but steady. "What changed your mind?" He glanced at the flash drive in his palm. "Clara, she left me this. She believed in truth more than I believed in my own blood." Evelyn smiled faintly, tears welling in her tired eyes. "Then don't waste that belief." He lowered his head. "I failed her. I failed you. I let power blind me to what mattered." "No," Evelyn said softly. "You just forgot what love looks like when it's honest. Find her. Tell her." He swallowed hard. "She won't listen." "Then make her," she whispered. "Confession isn't about being heard, Graham. It's about being true." Her words settled in his chest like a flame. He stayed with her until her breathing steadied, then left quietly. The rain outside thickening into a steady downpour. As he walked through the parking lot, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Meet me at the old marina midnight. Come alone. There was no signature, but he knew. Martin wasn't finished. Graham drove there anyway. The marina was deserted, the wooden docks slick with rain. Boats rocked against the current, their ropes creaking. He stepped out of the SUV, headlights slicing through the mist. Martin stood at the end of the dock, an umbrella over his head, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. "Couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Martin said as Graham approached. "I suppose you're here to play hero." "I'm here to end this," Graham said. "I've already sent copies of the files to the board. You're done." Martin exhaled smoke slowly. "You think they'll believe you? You think you'll come out clean? You're in every signature, every deal. You're as guilty as I am." "Maybe," Graham said, "but I'll face it. You never will." Martin's smirk vanished. He flicked the cigarette into the water and stepped closer. "You don't get it, do you? The world doesn't care about truth. It cares about control." "Then I'll take the truth," Graham said. "Control's what killed my father, and what almost killed me." The two men stared at each other, rain dripping from their coats, lightning flashing far out over the ocean. For the first time, Martin looked uncertain. "You really are your father's son," he said. "No," Graham replied quietly. "I'm his correction." He turned and walked away, leaving Martin standing alone on the dock as thunder rolled overhead. Back in his SUV, Graham's hands trembled as he started the engine. He didn't feel triumphant, only hollow, exhausted, and strangely light. The truth had cost him everything, but for the first time it felt like a price worth paying. He drove through the night toward the coast, toward the only place that had ever felt like redemption. Hours later, he reached the small house, perched on the cliff's edge. Clara's friend's place, the one Evelyn had mentioned she might be staying at. Light flickered faintly through the windows, golden against the storm. He stepped out into the rain, his coat soaking instantly, and walked to the door. For a long moment, he just stood there, the confession heavy in his chest. Then he knocked. The door opened slowly. Clara stood there barefoot, wearing a sweater too big for her, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Graham," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "I had to be," he said. Rain dripped from his hair, his voice shaking. "Because you were right. Martin's been lying for years. He forged my father's contracts. He used me, and I let him. But you—" His voice broke. "You saw it before I did." She looked at him, torn between anger and compassion. "Why tell me now because I can't undo what I've done?" he said. "But I can tell the truth. All my life I built towers to prove I was nothing like my father. But I've been living his mistake, trusting the wrong man and losing the right one." The words hung there raw and unguarded. Clara's eyes glistened. "You think that's enough, no?" he said. "It's just where I start." He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold. "You didn't just save my mother that night. You saved me from becoming the man I swore I'd never be." For a moment, the only sound was the rain, steady and unending. Then Clara's voice, soft but steady. "Truth doesn't erase pain, Graham. It just lets the wound breathe." "Then let it," he said. "I'd rather live scarred than hollow." Something in her broke, then the wall she had built around herself, the one made of betrayal and loneliness. She reached out, fingertips brushing the rain from his cheek. "You look like hell," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe I finally look honest." The storm raged around them, but for the first time it didn't feel cruel. It felt cleansing, like confession itself. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside, letting him in. The door closed softly behind them, and the sound of the sea rose up to meet the rain, endless and forgiving. The house on the cliff was small, worn by wind and salt, but in that moment it felt like the safest place on earth. The rain drummed against the roof, a soft percussion that filled the silence between them. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the ocean disappear into the dark horizon. Behind her, Graham paced near the fire, his wet clothes steaming faintly in the warmth. Neither spoke for a long while. There was too much to say, and too much that words could never fix. Finally, Clara turned. "You said you came to tell the truth," she said quietly. "You've done that. So what now?" Graham met her gaze, his expression stripped bare of the armor he had always worn. "Now I try to live it," he said, "and I start by making things right." "You can't undo what's already happened," she said. "You can't unbreak people." "No," he admitted, "but maybe I can stop pretending that I didn't break too." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. Clara looked at him, the exhaustion in his face, the faint tremor in his hands, and saw a man undone, not by failure, but by the courage to face it. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this time the truth wouldn't collapse under the weight of pride. But she had been fooled by sincerity before. Why now, she asked, her voice barely above the rain. "Why tell me everything tonight?" "Because if I didn't," he said, "I'd never stop running from the storm that made me." He walked closer, each step slow and deliberate. "You were the first person who ever told me no. Do you know what that did to me?" "Made you angry?" she said. "No," he replied softly. "It made me listen." He stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching hers. "All my life, people have lied to me, sometimes to protect me, sometimes to use me. You're the first who told me the truth, even when it cost you everything. You didn't need to save me, but you did. And I didn't deserve it." Clara's throat tightened. "You didn't ask to be saved?" "Maybe not," he said. "But I think you did it anyway." The firelight danced over his face, softening the sharp lines that power and ambition had carved there. He looked younger, almost fragile. "You didn't just save my mother that night," he said, his voice shaking. "You saved me from becoming the man I swore I'd never be." Clara turned away, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She wanted to stay angry, but anger couldn't survive in the presence of something this naked, this true. "You talk about salvation like it's easy," she said. "It's not. It's slow. It hurts." "Then let it hurt," he said quietly. "I don't want forgiveness if it comes cheap." The room fell into silence again, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the rain. Clara walked toward the table, picking up the damp envelope she'd brought back from her old firm. "These are the blueprints," she said, "the original ones, the ones that prove Martin forged the documents. You'll need them to expose him." Graham took the envelope carefully, his fingers brushing hers. "And I already lost my name once," she said. "If this helps restore what's left of yours, that's enough." "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to disappear again. You did what was right. You deserve to be seen for it." She shook her head. "The world doesn't reward honesty." "Then we'll change the world," he said simply. For a moment she almost laughed at his certainty, but there was something in his tone, a quiet resolve, that made her believe him. He stepped closer. "I don't expect you to trust me," he said, "but I need you to know that I'm done hiding. Tomorrow I'm going to the press. I'll testify against Martin. I'll release every document, every signature. I'll risk the company, my reputation, everything. Clara's heart raced. If you do that, you'll lose everything you built. Then maybe it was never mine to keep, he said. Maybe it belonged to the truth all along. She stared at him, words caught in her throat. There was no arrogance left in him now. No trace of the man who had once measured worth in dollars and dominance. There was only a man stripped of illusion, standing in the wreckage of his own redemption. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the ocean. The storm was fading, but its rhythm still pulsed through the house. "You'll need proof," she said. "Real proof. Witnesses' statements, the whole picture. You'll help me?" he asked carefully. "If we do this," she said, "we do it right." He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me," she said. "Just don't make me regret it." He smiled faintly. "That's fair." Hours passed. They worked side by side at the table, sorting through files and notes, piecing together the trail of lies Martin had built. It felt like something sacred, two people reclaiming the narrative that had stolen years from them both. At one point, Clara looked up to find Graham watching her. What she asked. "You're different when you're doing this," he said softly. "Alive, certain." "This is who I was," she said, "before the world decided it preferred me quiet." "Then let it hear you again," he said, loudly. She looked down, a faint smile touching her lips. "You're impossible. I've been called worse." The rain began to ease outside, replaced by the gentle hiss of wind across the cliffs. When they finally stopped, exhaustion settled over them like a blanket. Graham leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Do you ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe we were supposed to meet that night? That maybe the storm was more than just weather?" "You're getting poetic," she teased lightly, though her voice trembled. "Maybe storms are just storms." "Maybe," he said. "But I think some storms are people colliding at the right time." She looked at him for a long moment, then away. "You should get some rest." "I don't think I could," he said. "Not yet? Then at least sit down before you fall." He did, lowering himself onto the couch near the fire. She joined him, and for a while they just listened to the wind. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like something waiting to grow. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what peace feels like?" "Like this," she said, "except we don't trust it when it comes." He smiled, eyes half closed. "Then maybe it's time we learn." She turned to him, studying his face in the soft glow. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, but also a strange calmness, as if confession had washed away years of pretense. "You're not the man I met that night," she said. "Good," he murmured. "That man was drowning. And now I'm learning to breathe." She didn't respond, but she reached out, resting a hand over his. He didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her with a quiet reverence that made her chest ache. Outside, the clouds began to break, revealing the faintest hint of dawn along the horizon. The rain slowed to a whisper, and somewhere in the distance, the first bird dared to sing. Clara exhaled a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "The storm's ending," she said softly. "Maybe," he replied, "or maybe it's just changing shape." She turned her head toward him. "You talk like a man who's lost everything." "No," he said, "like a man who finally knows what's worth finding." The fire crackled, throwing light across their faces. For the first time, she didn't pull away when his fingers brushed hers. The connection was tentative, fragile, but real. "This doesn't fix us," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but maybe it's a start." And for the first time in years, Clara Hayes let someone hold her hand without fear. The night outside softened the rain, becoming a memory. And in the fragile stillness between storms, two broken people began to rebuild something neither of them had planned for something that felt impossibly like home. 6 months later, the Oregon coast had changed. Spring had returned, turning the gray cliffs green and soft, and the sea that once roared in anger now shimmered with quiet light. The Driftwood Inn had been restored, its weathered walls painted anew, its sign polished until the name gleamed against the morning sun. Inside the fireplace burned gently, not out of necessity, but warmth. A quiet hum of voices filled the space builders, locals, travelers, all drawn by something more than just a guest house. They came because of what it represented now: redemption, resilience, and truth reclaimed. Clara Hayes stood behind the counter, her hair tied loosely, her hands inked faintly from sketching blueprints earlier that morning. She had reopened her small studio True North Architecture, a firm focused on rebuilding, ethically creating spaces that honored the land instead of exploiting it. It was a modest operation, but it was hers and it was honest. Every line she drew felt like breathing again. She looked up as the bell above the door chimed softly. Graham Ward stepped in the ocean wind, tugging at his coat. He looked different, simpler somehow. The expensive suits had been replaced by rolled sleeves and calloused hands, the look of a man who'd traded skyscrapers for foundations that actually mattered. The world had not forgotten his fall from grace. When he had gone public with the evidence against Martin Cole, the scandal had dominated headlines for months. Ward Global had been investigated, shareholders revolted, and Martin was arrested for fraud and corruption. Graham had stepped down as CEO the next day, transferring a large part of his holdings to environmental and social restoration projects. He had been called naive, foolish, even self-destructive, but when he looked at Clara now, none of those words mattered. "You're early," she said, smiling faintly. "You said 10. I couldn't wait," he said, walking toward her. "I finished the survey plans for the coastal rebuild." She took the folder from him, flipping through the sketches. They were meticulous new housing for displaced families, storm-resistant structures, community centers along the coast. "You did this, we did," he corrected gently. "Your designs, my funding, our promise." She looked up, eyes softening. "You really kept it. I keep all my promises now," he said. For a moment, silence settled between them, warm and familiar. The kind that didn't need filling. She closed the folder and leaned against the counter. "How's your mother? Better?" he said. "She's in physical therapy, but already arguing with the nurses, so I'd say she's recovering." Clara laughed softly. "She's tougher than both of us combined." "She always was," he said. "She wants to visit next week. Says she owes you a garden. A garden." Her way of saying, "Thank you, I think." Clara smiled, shaking her head. "Tell her she doesn't owe me anything." "She disagrees," he said. "She says the night you opened that door, you changed 2 lives." Clara's voice softened. "She changed mine, too." Graham studied her, then the light catching her face. There was peace in her now, but also something deeper, an unspoken strength that came from surviving storms and still choosing to love the world anyway. "I missed this place," he said quietly. "It feels alive again." "It took time," she admitted, "and work, but it's worth it. Everything worth keeping is," he said. She hesitated, then asked, "What about you? Do you miss it? The company, the power?" He shook his head. "Power without peace isn't power, it's noise." And now Now I wake up, make coffee, walk by the ocean, and remember that I can build something good without owning it. That sounds almost poetic, she teased. Don't tell anyone, he said with a grin. It'll ruin my reputation. She laughed, but her heart fluttered in a way she hadn't expected. There had been many quiet visits like this over the past months, shared coffee, long walks, rebuilding projects. But neither had said aloud what lingered between them. They didn't need to. Healing had its own language, and theirs had been written in silence, labor, and small kindnesses. The storm had stripped them both bare, and in that emptiness, something honest had grown. Graham stepped closer now, close enough for her to see the faint scar near his jaw, a remnant from the night at the marina. Clara, he said softly, there's something I've been meaning to say. Her pulse quickened, though she didn't move. You've already said plenty, she murmured. Not this, he said. He took a small velvet box from his coat pocket, his hand trembling slightly. Before you panic, he added quickly, it's not what you think. Not yet. He opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring engraved with the shape of a compass. A compass, she asked, half smiling. You always said you got lost after Seattle, he said. I figured you deserved something that reminds you you're already home. Her throat tightened. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he interrupted gently, because I know what it feels like to be lost too long. He took a breath, his voice unsteady. Clara, I used to think love was about possession, about holding on so tightly that nothing could slip away. But you taught me it's about confession, about saying the truth, even when it costs you everything. Her eyes shimmered. So what's your truth now? That I don't want redemption without you, he said. And I don't want peace if it doesn't have your laughter in it. She looked at him, tears breaking through, despite the smile that pulled at her lips. You always did talk too much when you were scared. He laughed softly. You make me nervous. Good, she said, taking the ring from the box. You should be. He watched as she slipped it onto her right hand, the compass catching the light. It fits, she said. Then maybe it was meant to. For a moment, the world outside the inn fell away. The sound of the sea faded, the ticking clock slowed, and the air between them filled with something that didn't need defining. He reached for her, then hesitantly, and she didn't pull back. His arms wrapped around her, the warmth of the fire, brushing against their skin. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper. A promise sealed not with passion, but with peace. You'll stay a while, she asked when they finally drew apart. As long as you'll have me, he said. She smiled. Then you'd better get used to storms. The coast doesn't forgive easily. Neither do you, he said. But you love harder than anyone I've ever met. She looked up at him, her smile trembling. Then don't make me regret it. Never, he whispered. The sound of seagulls echoed faintly outside the tide, rolling in beneath the cliffs. The rain that had once nearly drowned them both had become something else entirely, a memory, a cleansing, a beginning. Evelyn arrived a week later, bringing seedlings and laughter, insisting on planting roses along the fence. The community gathered for the opening of the new coastal housing project, and when Graham spoke, his voice was steady, humble. We can't rebuild what we destroyed, he said, but we can build something honest in its place. Clara watched from the crowd, the wind catching her hair, the ring glinting in the sunlight. She had thought the storm had taken everything, but now she understood it had only washed away what wasn't real. As evening fell, the sea turned gold, and Graham joined her by the railing. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the light scatter across the waves. Finally, Clara spoke. "You ever think about that night every day?" he said. "It reminds me that sometimes the worst storms bring us home." She reached for his hand, fingers intertwining easily, naturally, as though they'd been doing it forever. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky painted in pink and silver. The world felt still complete. "The light always returns," she whispered. "It does," he said, "but it's never the same. It's softer, wiser, like us." She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing. For the first time, the sound of the waves didn't sound lonely. It sounded like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. A year later, the world had quieted in all the right ways. The Oregon coast shimmered beneath a soft spring sky, the sea gentle and endless, stretching toward a horizon that no longer felt unreachable. The Driftwood Inn stood proudly on the cliff, its windows glowing golden in the late afternoon light, its gardens alive with roses, lavender, and the sound of wind chimes Evelyn had insisted on hanging from every porch beam. The storm that had once nearly torn the world apart was now just a memory, whispered by the ocean breeze. Inside, laughter echoed down the hallway, the kind of easy, unguarded laughter that only came from people who had survived something together. Evelyn sat by the window, wrapped in her favorite blue shawl, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes bright with the mischief of someone who had witnessed far too much to take life too seriously anymore. Beside her, Clara adjusted the lace on her simple ivory gown, smoothing the fabric nervously, even though there was no one to impress. The wedding was small, just a handful of people, the sea as witness, and the ghosts of every storm they had weathered. Evelyn reached for her hand. "You look beautiful, dear. Harold would have adored you." Clara smiled softly, the mention of Evelyn's late husband now carrying warmth instead of pain. "I think he's here," she said. "In the quiet." "He is," Evelyn whispered. "And so is the girl you used to be, the one who opened her door that night." She was scared, Clara said, but she opened it anyway. "And that's what love is, isn't it?" Evelyn said. "Opening doors even when it's raining." Clara laughed quietly, blinking back tears. "You always know what to say. Comes with age," Evelyn said, "and regret. Don't waste too many years learning what I did." Outside, the waves glittered under the sun as guests began to gather on the bluff overlooking the sea. A few locals, some of Graham's colleagues who had stood by him when the world turned its back, and a handful of friends from Clara's past life, people who had believed her when no one else did. They stood beneath an arch made of driftwood and roses, the wind fluttering through white ribbons that danced like ghosts of the storm long gone. Graham waited there, his suit simple but perfectly cut, his hair tousled by the wind. He looked calm in a way that only came from a man who had made peace with every version of himself. When Clara stepped outside, every sound seemed to hush. The ocean slowed, the air stilled, and even the gulls circled silently overhead. Her dress moved like water, light and effortless, and when she reached him, the entire world seemed to breathe again. "You're late," Graham teased softly, though his voice trembled with emotion. "I had to make sure you'd really show up this time," she said, her eyes glinting with affection. "I'm done running," he said. "I found where I belong." "Here?" she asked. "With you," he said. Evelyn's voice broke through the hush, her tone steady, though her hands trembled as she held the small book of vows. "We're not here to bind what's already bound," she began. "We're here to witness what's already true." These two souls have walked through storms, real and metaphorical, and they stand here now, not to forget them, but to honor what the rain gave back. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the sea across the cliffs. Graham took Clara's hands, his thumbs tracing soft circles against her skin. "You once told me," he said quietly, "that truth doesn't erase pain. It just lets the wound breathe. You were right. And you're the reason I learned to breathe again. I spent my life chasing redemption, but I didn't understand it until I found you. You showed me that love isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the courage to face them. So I promise to never hide from the truth again, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." Clara's tears glistened as she smiled through them. "You asked me once what peace feels like," she said. "I didn't know then, but I know now. It feels like this, like holding your hand in the middle of the wind and knowing we'll still be standing when it passes. I promise not to fix you, not to save you, but to walk beside you through every storm that comes." Evelyn closed the book gently. "Then by the power vested in love itself, I pronounce you partners, builders, and believers. No storms required." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Graham leaned forward, brushing his lips against Clara's, in a kiss that was soft and deep and full of everything they'd fought for. When they pulled apart, the ocean roared its applause, and sunlight spilled across the water like a benediction. The celebration that followed was quiet, intimate, full of warmth. They danced barefoot in the grass, their laughter mingling with the sea breeze. Evelyn watched from her chair, her eyes glistening, her smile serene. As twilight descended, Clara walked to the edge of the bluff, looking out over the horizon where the sky met the sea. Graham came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The air was cool, fragrant with salt and flowers. "It's strange," she murmured. "For years I thought storms meant endings. Now I think they mean beginnings." "Maybe both," he said. "Maybe the end of who we were is just the beginning of who we're meant to be." She leaned back against him. "You sound like someone who's finally learned to write poetry." "Don't tell anyone," he said. "It'll ruin my reputation." She laughed, her head resting on his shoulder. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and violet. The waves moved gently, rhythmic and sure, no longer the threat they once were, but a reminder of what they'd survived. Behind them, the guests began to drift away, and the lights from the inn glowed softly, a beacon against the coming night. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching them, her voice carried faintly by the wind. When she opened her door that night, she said she didn't just save an old woman. She opened a door to every lost heart that still believes in goodness. Graham turned his head slightly, whispering near Clara's ear. "No storm lasts forever." She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "Some storms stay just long enough to bring us home." He kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. Together they stood there, the sound of the waves rising and falling, like the breath of the earth itself. In that stillness, everything felt right, the past forgiven, the future unwritten, the present enough. As the stars emerged one by one, Clara looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer, not of longing, but of gratitude. She had once feared storms. Now she understood they were merely the sea's way of reminding her that light always returns. And so beneath the vast Oregon sky, with the wind in their hair and the scent of rain still in the air, Clara and Graham Ward began. The quiet forever they had fought so hard to earn. Before you go, if this story touched something deep inside you, if you felt the storm, the silence, and the light that came after, don't let this be where our journey ends. Stories like this one are what remind us that love isn't perfect, that redemption doesn't come easy, and that sometimes the people who change our lives forever arrive in the most unexpected ways. If you believe in second chances, in quiet courage, in the kind of love that heals instead of hurts, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Maybe it's a rainy city like Seattle, a quiet coast like Oregon, or a small town where the waves can still be heard in the distance. No matter where you are, I want to know your thoughts. What moment broke your heart? Which one mended it? Because when we share those moments, we remind each other that even through heartbreak, there's beauty in beginning again. Don't forget to like this story if you believe that love deserves another chance, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. Maybe they're going through their own storm. Maybe they're standing at a door, afraid to open it, not knowing that kindness could change everything. Help me reach them. And if you've been following Emma's stories, you already know this is more than a channel. It's a place for believers in fate, for dreamers who've been hurt, but still hope for people who know that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can rewrite an entire life. Each week, I bring you new tales of love found in unlikely places, stories of lost hearts, healed souls, and the gentle human truth that we're all just looking for a place to call home. So turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that could remind you what real connection feels like. And if you've ever been someone's shelter in the storm, or if someone has ever opened their door for you, drop A in the comments to let me know I'm not alone in believing that goodness still wins. Because here in this little corner of the internet, we still believe in love that stays even when it's tested by rain time or distance. Thank you for being part of this story. Thank you for being part of Emma's stories. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, no storm lasts forever.